right. So, as part of my experiment, I've been experimenting with case capacity, as I mentioned earlier. So, one of the tricks that I've learned, actually not too long ago, I'd say about maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago. Actually, I think I learned that off of YouTube as well, is a little trick to try to get a little bit more case capacity. So I've been going through this experiment with the Lapua versus the Norma once fired 55 grain Norma tack. That was just a cheaper way for me to get into it by shooting the Norma tack 55 grain in my SPR, or I'm sorry, SBR, and then taking the brass and using it for my 18-inch. So anyways, the trick that I learned is no secret. I mean, if you've been around long enough, you'll know this, but this is kind of a proof that it exists, and that's settling the powder with vibration. So a lot of times, especially with Varget, so Varget, you know, it's a pretty big extruded powder. I don't know if you can pick that up at all, but the granules themselves are pretty large. So on a smaller rifle like the 223, you run out of volume, you run out of case capacity, and hence my quest. I really like Varget. I like the Hodgdon Extreme series of powders. I'm going to be experimenting with the H4895 here shortly as part of the Lapua experiment. But I wanted to show you that there really is a difference when you settle the powder. And I'm trying to get this to come across through the video as best I can. I might use my little Olight S1R baton to try to shed some more light on this. I think that's a little bit better. Let's try that. There we go. So the case on the right, so they both have an identical load of Varget, but the case on the right is all the way up past the shoulder, and that is not settled. The one on the left, you can see, is down quite a bit further. It's actually below the top of the shoulder. So the one on the right would start to crunch as you load it ahead, especially a bigger one like a 69 grain that I'm partial to. The one on the left, you would be able to load that in there no problem. So this is 26 grains, 26.0 grains of Varget, and you can see, I hope you can see, where the level is actually quite a bit lower when it's been settled. So the method that I use for settling the powder, I've tried a few things. Yeah, you know, at first I tried, you know, the poor man's version of just tapping on the side, but as you can see what happened there, it's very easy for powder to come out, especially if you're doing more than one at a time. The next thing I tried is, after learning some things and doing some reading and watching some videos, is using an electric toothbrush, because the vibration, and just touching it on the edge of the case and having it vibrate. And I was using like an old business card or something to cover the top, so that way the oils in my hand weren't getting inside the case. And that worked a little bit, but it just didn't have enough vibration power. So I actually, what works the best is using a tumbler. So most reloaders have a tumbler already in their reloading arsenal, and so the tumbler, you know, is a unit that will vibrate your brass to clean it, and it actually works great, and that's how I settled this. I put it on there for about 30 seconds, and you get a pretty significant settling of the powder. Another method, the old timers will tell you, you can use drop tubes, which are mainly used for black powder, but they're like long plastic tubes, or they don't have to be plastic, but long tubes. You could be, I don't know, 2 feet or longer, and just by the act of the powder dropping it in the top and coming all the way down, it'll actually settle out better than just using a funnel and dropping it in. But I found that the vibration from the tumbler actually works really, really well. Now, again, back to, you'll spill a few loads before you come up with your own trick, but here's something that I've come up with. And if you haven't seen these already in some of my other videos, I just use these loading blocks. These loading blocks are actually CCI Blazer 9mm plastic packaging. So anytime I shoot some Blazer, or anytime I go to the range, I always dig through the trash and see if they got any more of these. I've got probably 20 of them now, but they're the perfect size for loading 223. So anyways, back to the tumbling. So what I do is I take another one and I actually flip it over, and I set it on top so that way there's no possible way for the powder to come out, and I'm not touching it with my hand, and it's just something big, easy to hold on to. So what I'll usually do is I'll usually do 5 or 10 at a time, and I'll set them all here on one side, and then I'll get a good grip on it, something like this, and then I'll just kind of touch the corner to the top of the tumbler as it's vibrating, and I'll just kind of touch it like that. And I usually do 30 to 40 seconds. I pull up my stopwatch, that way I'm not trying to guess at the time. And I'm consistent. I mean, consistency is what you're after, and it's the name of the game in precision loading. So that's just kind of my little trick to settling some powder. So then again, back to the discussion on case capacity. So these are the 25, excuse me, these are the 25 cases that I did the water test with to find the internal volume. Now, one thing I'd forgotten to mention, which I'll mention now, is obviously you don't want water anywhere near your loaded cartridges. So I'm a big fan of the ultrasonic cleaners. So I'm already used to having water in my process. But if you're not used to having water in your process, make sure you do a double check. You want to make sure there's no possible moisture whatsoever in there when you're dropping your powder and your primers into there. That's just going to be all kinds of bad news. So typically what I'll do is, if I'm using my ultrasonic cleaner, I'll give the brass a bath until they come out shiny, and primer pockets are clean and everything's looking good. I like to use the Hornady one-shot ultrasonic cleaner fluid. That stuff works really well, although it does smell surprisingly similar to Windex, so take that for what it's worth. But anyways, it's cheap enough that, especially if you buy it in bulk, that you can use it no problem. You're only using about an ounce at a time, or depending on how big your ultrasonic cleaner is. But anyways, so what I do is, after they come out of their bath, I'll probably do a better video of this later, but I use the microfiber cloths you can get in the Walmart automotive section, and I only do small batches in the ultrasonic cleaner because mine's small, from Harbor Freight. It's not one of the big Hornady or RCBS ones. So you pop it out of there, roll them around in a towel, just get all the big wetness off, shake them around so you get some of the big stuff out of there. And then what I did is I actually took a bunch of these loading blocks, and I just took a drill, and I drilled a hole in each one of these little spots where you'd put them. So when they're come out and they're wet, I put a towel down on a table, put my loading block. This does not have holes in it, but I have some with holes in it. And then I take the case upside down, so the water will drain out, won't collect at the base. And I set them, the downward orientation, primer's pocket facing up, and I let it sit overnight. Now, that's just how I do it. To me, reloading is something I do as a stress relief and for fun. So to me, I'm not usually in a big rush to do any loading. I'll do an hour or two at a time, and then if it starts frustrating me, I'll just get to a stopping point and I'll stop. That's a big thing with loading is don't let it frustrate you. Don't get upset. Don't be distracted. Don't make mistakes. So anyways, I'll leave them overnight. Now, some people I've seen, they'll get like a cookie bake sheet and line them up and then pop them in the oven on low heat for a couple hours just to bake away any of the heat. And that's fine, as long as you do your research and you know what temperature you need to stay below. And off the top of my head, I can't remember it, but you don't want to heat brass too much because then you get into the annealing temperatures. So as long as you stay below that heat, you should be fine. But again, don't just pop it in there willy-nilly and expect good results. Double check what the temperature of the annealing process is and stay a good 30, 40, 50 degrees less than that, and you should be fine. But like I said, I don't mess with that. I just when they come out of the bath, I shake them off, I put them in my loading block with holes, put them on a towel, and I leave them overnight. And then when I come back, I know they're bone dry. And they're sitting in room temperature, so it's not like it's really cold or really hot in the room either. So anyways, I just wanted to do a quick segment on that. Again, the settling is hugely important. So if if we could go back to the discussion on the case capacity, I do have my numbers in, and I'm stepping away just quickly over to my computer here. So what I did is I did an experiment where I actually took a case and I put a primer in it and I loaded it up, and then I took a head, and you can see this one's kind of all been a little bit deformed and isn't really good for much. It's been loaded and pulled and loaded and pulled quite a few times. But what I wanted to find out was how many grains of Varget and or H4895 I could fit into the new Lapua cases versus my old go-to, the Norma 55 brass casings, which are pretty much as good as the Norma brass that you'd buy unfired. So what I did is my process was I went to a point that I knew would be not quite all the way up, threw a charge, measured it, wrote it down, took my head, seated to my standard load length, my overall length, and then I turn off any noise that might be around me and put my ear right up next to the case and pull down on the press slowly and listen for any crunch. So didn't get any crunch, bring it over to my bullet puller, pop it in there, pull the head off, dump the powder, go up half a grain, throw that charge, do the same thing. Unsettled, not settling the powder. Once I hear just a little bit of crunch, I'm okay with just a slight bit of crunch. I'm not into the compressed load, so I don't want to be super solid, but I'm okay if the base of the bullet is touching or slightly moving down on the powder. And then what I do once I hear that first little bit of crunch, then I'll take the loaded case, and again I'll put it up next to my ear and I'll shake it. And when you shake it, if you can hear anything moving in there, then it's not a compressed load. Now I know that's not 100% scientific, but to me it makes sense. If you've compressed it down to the point where nothing can move inside there enough to make a sound, doesn't necessarily mean it's an unsafe load. Many people do compression loading all the time, but for me, I just choose to stay away from it. It's not downing anyone who chooses to do compressed loads. It's just something I don't get into. So, but once I hit that point where I hear a little bit of crunch, but I can still shake it and there's still movement inside, and I'm at my comparator length. I use the Hornady comparator to right where I want it to be. Then I write that number down and say, okay, this is the unsettled max fill for a specific case with a specific head with a specific powder. Okay, you got to have all of that thought of ahead of time. Then what I do is then I go into settling it. Okay, so I'm obviously going to be more than what I put in unsettled. So typically the last few times, especially with this bigger powder, I found about a 1.5 grain increase that you can fit in there when you settle the powder versus unsettling it. Now that's your mileage is gonna vary with that, so take that with a grain of salt. You might get a little bit more, you might get less. And of course that's for a 223. It's gonna be different for 308 or any other bigger case. So I do the same process, the same evolution over and over again. I start low, go up until I hear a crunch. Then I shake it by my ear. You know, if I hear the crunch and I shake it and there's no sound, I'll actually pull the head, dump the case, rethrow another one, maybe 0.1 or 0.2 less, until I get to the point where I can just slightly hear the crunch, but I can still shake it, and when I shake it, I can still hear movement with my ears. So that's kind of my scale, and then once I do that, then I write that down. And I use the same head, and so obviously as it gets seated and unseated over and over again, it kind of wears the finish like that. So there's some considerations with when you actually go to pop your head in. You got to take that into account. But anyways, going back to my computer here. So in my Norma cases, my old Norma cases, 223, using the 69 grain Sierra Match Kings, which is my go-to, I found that in the Norma cases with no settling of the powder, I was only able to get 22.6 grains of powder into of Varget, grains of Varget, 22.6 grains of Varget into a Norma case with no settling. Then once I was settling, I was able to get up to 24.4 with Varget. So again, that's close to 2 grains. I mean, that's just shy of 2 grains. So that makes a huge difference. Now, once you start doing that, though, you do have to watch for pressure signs. So definitely keep that in mind. I mean, you should be doing that anyways. But if you're settling, you got to really be watching, because now you're putting more powder in there in the same amount of space. So you're reducing the air. So anyways, so 22.6 unsettled, 22.4 settled. Then I did some experimenting with Lake City. I know you can't reload for very long before someone will tell you need to use Lake City brass. And so I used a weight sorted, fully prepped Lake City 2012. And I was able to get 23.6 unsettled and 25.6 settled. So about 1 full grain more case capacity than the Norma into the Lake City. The issue I ran into with the Lake City 2012 is just didn't shoot that well for me. I did everything I could. I gave it every chance. And I mean, it was okay, but it wasn't nearly the performance of the Norma brass. Anyways, moving to the Lapua. So today's experimentation, I was able to do, and now I switched over to the H4895. I also did Varget, but they were basically exactly the same. 24.5 unsettled and 26.0 settled. So basically the Lapua starting point, so you know, like I'm saying here, so this is the Lapua on this hand, and this is the Norma on my left here. So I mean, just right off the bat, the point at which the Lapua is starting with no settling, just straight up pouring the powder in there, is the point that you have to go through the process of settling the powder on the Norma. So to me, that's a huge deal. So I'm super excited about that and ready to load up some cases and get going with that. Next we're going to talk about kind of my plans for testing out the new combination. I should say new to me, definitely not new to the industry. It's been around forever, but new to me, doing the Lapua brass and the Hodgdon 4895.